U.S. soldiers are now fighting alongside Iraqis near the front lines against Islamic State. And that's according to the latest statement from the commander of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria.
It is true that we're operating closer and deeper into the Iraqi formation. So we adjusted our posture during the East Mosul fight.
RT's Ilya Petrenko joins me now in the studio to discuss this in more detail. Ilya, so what more do we know?
Marina, well, this is really an outstanding development that we're seeing right now. This is essentially the commanders of U.S. troops in Iraq that we kept hearing from Pentagon that they're there to support and advise the Iraqi troops. This is them essentially admitting that they are actively engaged at the front line. Now, you see, for quite some while now, the lines between frontline missions and advisory missions have been blurry because some 4 months ago, under the Obama administration, a media outlet that is affiliated with the Pentagon, Stars and Stripes, reported that they have seen U.S. troops actively engaged on the ground in the crucial Battle of Mosul. Just to remind you, that's a battle to retake a city with more than a million citizens in population from Islamic State. Well, back then, a spokesperson from the Pentagon firmly denied any kind of involvement on the front line. He said they were there only for a supporting role.
I think it's fair to say that there are Americans that are on the outskirts of the city, but I'm not going to get into the disposition of every single American. What I will tell you again, Lucas, is that it's the Iraqis in the lead. The Iraqis are at the front, and Americans are providing their advisory role, but they are behind the forward line of troops, and they are providing that same sort of advice and assistance that they have in Iraq previously.
So that was 4 months ago. But again, judging from what we're hearing from U.S. military commanders on the ground in Iraq, now they are quietly getting closer to admitting or even admitting that the U.S. troops are there fighting shoulder to shoulder against Islamic State forces in the battle for Mosul. So as I was saying, that is an outstanding development, and we'll have to see how people back in America react to that, Marino.
Absolutely. We'll have to see what pans out. Thanks so much, Ilya, for bringing this update on the situation there. And we are now going to discuss it in more detail with the political analyst Chris Bamberg. Chris, thanks so much for joining us here on RT. Now, what do you think of this development, and what do you think it means for the Mosul operation and for America's overall involvement in Iraq?
Well, first of all, the Mosul operation has taken far longer than we are led to believe, and there's been a significant delay in capturing the city. So this may be an attempt to ginger up the offensive on Mosul and bring this operation to an end, because it does need to be brought to an end, given the statements which have been made by Baghdad and indeed in Washington about the imminent recapture of the city. The other factor which I think might be in here as well is not just simply targeting Daesh in Mosul, but also ensuring that the military operation is carried through in the main by the Iraqi army, backed up by American forces, to the exclusion of the Iranians and the Shia militias to which the West believes are led by the Iranians. So it could also be an attempt to keep those out of the final capture of Mosul.
Well, U.S. Defense Secretary said that the rules of engagement for the U.S. troops in Iraq haven't changed. What does that mean? I mean, is that possible considering how close they claim to be to the front lines?
Well, I think, as your correspondent pointed out, the rules of engagement are very flexible. You're there in an advisory capacity, supposedly. What happens if you come under attack? Obviously, you fight back. And we should remember this is essentially how the American operations in Vietnam started, because originally they were there in an advisory educational capacity and they got drawn in. So I think there will be some concern in the United States of America about the possibility of American troops being pulled further and further into ground operations in Iraq, given the legacy, the nightmare, if you like, of the Iraq invasion in 2003 and the influence that still has on public opinion in the United States.
But given the rapidly developing situation there, I mean, how would the current administration react to what's going on? I mean, given that President Trump gave his generals 30 days to come up with a plan to destroy ISIL. And, for example, if he's presented with a plan that would involve boots on the ground, taking part in combat, do you think he'll go with it? And then what about Congress? Will it approve such a plan?
I think it's going to be interesting because really the whole Obama administration's policy in Syria in particular was incoherent. And in Iraq, a bit less so, and the Americans obviously have an open presence in Iraq. They have a presence in Syria too, we should remember. British and American special forces operate there. I think what we need to watch is what President Trump's strategy is going to be. On the campaign trail, as you say, he threatened to eliminate Daesh as a force in the region. And how is he going to pull through in that? And that could mean, of course, further American involvement in the operation to take Mosul. Really, this operation has to be brought to a conclusion. Otherwise, both the Baghdad administration and the administration in Washington are going to end up with some egg on their face. Because really, we've heard so much talk that Mosul is about to fall, and we're still not there yet. So there has to be a conclusion to the Mosul operation. How this plays out in Syria is going to be even more interesting. So I think what we're seeing is really possibly moving from what was an incoherent strategy in regards so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq under Obama to something which might be more coherent, which puts the priority on crushing ISIS, so-called ISIS, and not on regime change in Syria, which often seems to be the priority for the Obama administration.
Well, Chris, you know, what's also interesting here to talk about is the attention of the media to the situation in Mosul. We're suddenly hearing about the Mosul operation again after weeks of silence. Why is that?
Well, I think it's interesting because the majority of Western correspondents are embedded with the Iraqi forces in Mosul. Now, as you remember from the 2003 invasion of Iraq, that means they're very contained within the military units they're attached to. However, I think it's become obvious that they have been aware of American presence on the ground. And it is not really conceivable that this can be kept a secret any longer. And therefore, the Pentagon are having to admit that there are American troops near the front line, very carefully worded. I mean, you know, how much involvement in the fighting there is, we're still not aware. Maybe some of those embedded correspondents can give some clarification on that. But I think it's really an open secret, which could no longer be kept a secret. And they've got no choice but to say that American troops are involved on the ground.
Our political analyst, Chris Bembury, thanks so much for talking to us here on RT International.
These 630 refugees, including 70 women and children, were lucky. They were rescued on Tuesday by the Italian Coast Guard. More than 10,000 people have successfully made the 300-kilometer journey to Italy so far this year. Others haven't been so fortunate. The bodies of dozens of refugees who tried to cross the Mediterranean on Monday washed up on a Libyan shore. Just how they came to be there is unclear, but authorities fear a sinister link.
We understand the smugglers and the traffickers themselves were part of, they just removed the engine and disappeared. And this seems to be becoming a trend, and it's something we're really worried about, the tragedies that continue to happen in the Mediterranean.
The European Union says 1.6 million refugees reached its shores between 2014 and 2016. It's expecting a record number of refugees to cross by sea this year, primarily by being smuggled from Libya to Italy.
What we can also see is that they have almost nothing, no food, insufficient food, and in most of the cases they are not sufficiently equipped to reach any European territory.
Despite more rescue vessels trying to prevent mass drownings, there have been record deaths at sea. 228 people died in January. There were 4,579 deaths recorded last year, but the actual number is likely to be much higher. The year before, 2,869 people drowned. Those who are rescued and returned to Libya end up in detention camps. Relief organizations fear those stranded in Libya are often mistreated.
They are living here in circumstances which are contradicting humanitarian standards. They do not have enough food. They have really a serious situation here, and it's very important to solve their humanitarian problem.
My friend, Italian Coast Guard, we come to save you.
Despite the risky journey and the danger posed by smugglers, it's still a crossing many are willing to make for a better life.
Jump, jump.
Paul Tradurgian, Al Jazeera.
There's some big news among archaeologists today because yet another Hebrew inscription has been discovered during routine conservation efforts on an ancient synagogue in northern Israel. The inscription, which dates from the Roman period, was discovered on a limestone that lay overturned in the courtyard of the synagogue in Pekin. Pekin has a 2,000-year history of Jewish habitation, but today only one Jewish family remains in the predominantly Arab village. The matriarch of that family, Margalit Zinati, lives next door to the synagogue and has gone to great lengths to preserve the history of Jews in Pekin. Commenting on the find, Zev Elkin, the Minister of Jerusalem Affairs and Heritage, said that, quote, Pekin is one of the most significant sites in the Galilee and is a place where there has always been a Jewish presence.
Iraqi forces have recaptured a strategic village on the western flank of Mosul. Iraqi federal police is now in full control of Abu Saif's hill overlooking Mosul airport. It has also captured the Hammam al-Alil intersection on the main highway into Mosul. Iraqi forces engaged in heavy gun battles with Daesh terrorists before liberating Abu Saif. The ground force was heavily supported by the Air Force, with helicopters firing rockets on Daesh defense lines. Also, Iraqi fighter jets pounded Daesh positions, vehicles, and personnel in the city's western half. Mosul fell into the hands of the extremists in the summer of 2014 when Daesh terrorists captured large swaths of northern and western Iraq.